Alright, so we can say let's say John, Josh. Let's say create it in the form of an object. Joshua, so we say this is what. So this is what an object. You can verify by writing the by type of Josh if you want. Alright. So objects are usually represented in the form of key value pairs. We say key value pairs by saying that this is a key and this is a value. This is a key, this is a value. So the key here is what? And then the object is what? Okay, the value is what? Alright. We can do something like console.log Josh object.keys, let's say Josh. Alright, and it gives you the list of the keys available, which is what? In email. Forget about these ones, but if you say object.keys of Josh, right, you get all the keys that you have in here, right? I think you can do values to also objects that gives you all the values of this particular object. Right. So you can see that you can write another how do you call it? Just by saying object by saying Jane equals as I explained last time, it becomes difficult when you have 1,000 objects to write, right? So then we can have a blueprint from which we can write our objects from, right? Which we call it a constructor. But then again, let us look at functions first before we get to constructors. Right. So we can write a function by using the function keyword. Let's say we have test. And then what we want the function to do is to console.log test. How do we get this function to work?
When you console.log test,
we can get this function to work by calling the function. How do we call the function? Call the function by writing the name of the function, which is this one, using open and close brackets. It gives you that. Do you understand? Are you sure? Right. So we call this, how do you call it? This, and then this open close brackets, the syntax for writing the function. If you don't bring this keyword, you get an error. Right. So we call this function declaration. same function we told you the last time, we can rewrite the same function as what? An expression, which is function expression will be the same as test equals to the function. The same thing, right? But the difference between this and this is one. This is assigned to what? Variable. You understand? And then this one is not assigned to what? A variable, right? Okay. So let's say if I want to have a function that adds two numbers. The point of a function is for you to have a code that you don't repeat yourself over and over. Let's say you have num 1 equals to 20, 10, and then num 2 equals to 20. So then you have sum equals to num 1 plus num 2. You get it?
Yes.
So you can console the log sum, which gives you 30. Right. But what we want is, what if we want to add another number? Doesn't mean you have to write the number again and then write the sum. So the point of programming is to subtract, which is do not repeat yourself. Right. So it means that in this case, if you want to add another number, I can write const, I have to write const num 3 equals to, let's say, 30, const num 4 equals to, let's say, 45 or 45. It's repeating these things over and over again, which will make our code some way. So it will make sense that we write what? A function for it to be able to return the sum of what? Two numbers. Alright, so you can write it by saying function, by bringing the function keyword, the sum, and then the two numbers that you are trying to add. Let's say A and B, right? And then you return the value of A plus what? B. Do you understand? You understand the point of this return keyword?
Yes.
What does it mean?
We need to bring back the A.
Alright. So you can say sum 1 equals to sum of 20, 10, 20, 30. So also sum 1 gives you 40. So we can repeat the same process a million times without having to rewrite our addition part of, without having to rewrite this. Right. So saying this is const sum 2 equals to sum of 30 or sum 2 here. So 60 and then 40. Do you understand? Good. Okay. So let us talk about something this variable. Alright. If we write console.log of this, you see that we have what? Window. Alright. What happens is that when you write your JavaScript code, right, it scans your code from top to bottom, and then first, what is that one will scan your code from top to bottom, right? And then first of all, what we do is we have the creation. It does something where in two phases we have the creation phase. Alright. So in the creation phase, it will create a variable object. You try not to understand for now. Right? And then the next thing it will do is that it will set scope, and then it will create this object. Alright. I want us to talk about this part of what it does when it scans through your code, right? Alright. When it scans through your code, what it will do is that, let's say for example, in our JavaScript we have name equals to Kofi, right? Now yes, let's declare our name. Alright. Okay. And then all you're supposed to do is this console.log with the name variable. Alright. What do we get? Missing initialize of. Alright. We talk about the reason it doesn't work is that when you use const, right, you're supposed to give it a name. That's it. Alright. I'll explain what the difference between const and var is. But let's just stick to var. Alright. You know that if you want to declare a variable, use a var. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, in the middle. Anyway. So what it will do is that it will first create the variable object. What do I mean by that? You will scan through your code and then look for all your variable declarations. Let's say if you have name, email, and then let's say you can rewrite this same thing as, let's say you only have to separate it by comma, other than having to write it. It's the same thing, but sometimes the shorthand for this is to do email, so all one. So you can do another password. All one. So to your console.log name, what do we get? Huh?
Console.log name. You get anything.
Technically not true, but you're supposed to get undefined. I don't know why it is throwing this error. Let us come back here. us say if you console log x here, then do x equals to 1. First is undefined before 1. But if you have to put it here, we get 1 1. You get it. Alright. Then the next thing that we'll do is that we will look out for function declarations. Alright. First, before you run your code. So that's how come you don't get an error from this one, even though you've written it first here. Right? Even though we are saying that the code will scan from top, right? It will not run this one first, right? So, but scan for this. Assuming we have, say, function check, right? Alright, and then we have check here. The same thing. You understand? So what you do is that it will not run this code for you first, right? First of all, it will scan all of. Let us write another one. Var x. Alright, x equals to 10. Alright, and then console.log. What do you think you get? What do you think you get?
10.
10.
Yes.
Why?
Because it is called the document.
Confused. Confused.
Yes.
Okay. So what you will do is that our first console.log, what it does is that it will scan it first to undefined. First. You only console. It first it knows about this. It will not set its value. No.
So is it a console.log that scans for the variables?
No, it is the same, we call it interpreter. It scans from top to right, right? But first of all, it will take the value and set it to undefined first, right? So at this point, the JavaScript knows of the x variable, right? But it has not set it to 10 yet. It's only after it has done the console.log that it will set it to the 10. But at this point, it knows about the x variable. Okay, you exist. I don't say you did somewhere in the code, right? But I have not set your value yet because I will only set your value after, right? After the console.log. So that is how come you are undefined. You understand?
Yeah.
Then after it has set it to the 10, then you can have your 10 x here.
Okay.
Second, yeah. It's the only tricky part here, and that's sometimes I would want to emphasize on this part. So after it has done this, we scan for your variable declaration and then your function declarations. Then it will run your code based on whichever one that you are executing first. You understand? Alright. So you know that we write our function syntax like this. We can open and close brackets, console.log text and right. So how then do we get this to work? So if you don't call the function, it will not work. Right. So after it has scanned for your variable declare, talk about scope. So assuming we have var x equals to 20. Alright. You think we can write something that comes to log x? Why?
Because you have a variable of x.
Give you 20. Then we say var b equals to 30. Alright. Can we write what? What will we do?
Get it.
Sure. Final answer. Final answer.
Yes, we get it.
When we consider log x works, we consider log we consider log b, it works here, but if you bring this one here, you get an error. What do you think is wrong? Look at the code properly and point it out. Okay, you see that this one is inside a function, this one is outside. Right. The outer function cannot get access to the variables declared inside an inner function. It is only the inner function that gets access to the variable declared outside what? Right. Call it closures. So closure is when an inner function has access to the outer function variable parameters. You understand? So let's just do a simple, let's say function first, alright, and let's say a equals to 10, alright, function second, also log a. In this case, oh fuck, we call this function. In this case, we call this function. What do you think about that? What would be the console of log of a?
What's it?
So what?
What did it say? The consonant.
It will be 10.
Yes.
Okay, save. Okay, right. Then an error. Why?
Okay, because it's inside another function.
Right, because the scope of call it scope A is only available within just this function, right? The scope change comes, we call it scope chain. The scope change points downwards, not upwards. Right? What do I mean downwards? I mean upwards, sorry. Right, not downwards. If you watch this, right, this function can have access to A and then X. Let me demonstrate that. So if I do console.log X, 20. Right, it's upwards. Like from here, I can have access to this and then this. Right, but I can't have access to B, even to here.
You can't have access to B.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah. Through here.
To the top.
Wait. I'm calling the what? The first function. Alright. And then the first functions have these functions declared in it. This particular function declared in it, right? So I am saying that console.log A, which is what? 10. Right. If I write console.log B, I'll get an error because the scope chain doesn't point downwards, it points upwards. What do I mean by that? The first function cannot have access to B because B sits logically downwards inside the first function. But I can have console.log A because the second function is inside what? Inside the first function, which points what? You understand? Alright. So let's go for it again.
So you can have the console.log A will work in the second function.
Yeah, it will work in A.
And X to B.
Yes. But let me confuse you small. Alright. Let's say A equals, let's say here's X, right? What would the value of X? Great. Okay. Then what will be the value of X? Ah! Right. So when I say XX, why?
Because
The browser is wrong.
No, reads from the top to the bottom.
So what?
It reads from the top to the bottom.
So how come when it is the same variable, which is, I didn't declare it a different variable again. Right. But how come when it got here, it gave me, first I wrote console.log, it gave me 20 first. Alright. Now let's bring this one. Right, I'm sure. It gave me 20 here. I spot the whole thing. It gave me 20 here, and then at this point, it gave me 10.
Okay, because this one, we are being specific. That's it. You should also include the x in the function. That's why you type it in the function.
We call this variable what?
Notation.
Okay. Let me confuse this somehow. Save x is equal to 10. The same formula. Nothing has changed. The only thing I've added is this. And I'm logging x here. First we get 20 and 10. We got the same thing. Wait, that's not what I want to do. Yeah. Good. Right. Well, because it what are the difference?
Why you had 10 and 20 and something?
Right. But even though it's the same x, right? Okay. Let's start from, let's see, this is a part where I want you to, how you understand it. Let's see. Actual one. Shouldn't b be equals to a, which is 10, which I've changed here to what? And it should be equal to what? So in a normal circumstance, we have what?
20.
Why do we have a, which is 20, and then b to be a's value to start? Because when you declare a variable, right, it creates its own copy, unique copy, somewhere in memory, which is b. Right? So whatever you do to a, it doesn't really matter. Right? So if I change a to be b to be 20, let's say 400. Alright. You get it? Alright. So the same thing happens to this particular aspect. Oh, come on. Alright. Where we say that even though it's the same x, right, we've declared it as a different variable, which is inside this particular function, which is a unique what? Copy. But if we take out this var, we are pointing to what? The same variable, la. But if we write the var, it means that we are creating what? A unique copy which is different from that particular copy. Even though their names are the same. But they are what? Right. They're like twins. The fact that I've named my twins John and John doesn't mean that they are the same. They look alike, but if John should change his shirt, right, it doesn't mean that, how do you call it? The other John, which is of the same name, shirt will change. The only difference is that I made a mistake by giving them what?
The same name.
Right. But they are what?
Different.
Thank you. So that's what you should keep in mind all the time. I'm talking about these things because sometimes you'll be writing your code and you don't know why you are getting some of these errors, and sometimes it's due to where the variable is set in terms of its scope chain, right? Are you how do you call it? Let's say, oh come on, let's say const first name equals to, let's say, Kofi, right? And we write the function test console.log. You know we can have access to Kofi. Why?
Yeah.
Can we have access to Kofi? The first
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
Why?
Because the scope change.
Right. It sits on top of what? The inner function sits on top of what?
Down.
Right. So you can have Kofi. Oh. Oh, come on. What is this? Don't mind you. So we call the function. That one. But if we can have access to first name here too as well. Alright. But if we bring the first name here, what happens?
You get only one
And then what happened to the other Kofi?
coffee. To be undefined. To try it.
Huh?
To try it.
It's sure, but I think your mother's life depends on it.
You get one coffee and the other coffee to an error.
So first of all, what happens is that as long as there is error, your code will not what? Compile. So you say compile because we deal with the variable declaration. We are setting the scope and all of those things first before our code will pass. So if there is an error, you will not get your code working first. Keep that in mind because JavaScript is a single-threaded operation. Well, single-threaded operation. Right. So unless you put your Kofi word, the first name word, yeah, save, and you have a Kofi. But if there's an, if it is, let's just say, undefined. Undefined is not really an error. Your code will pass, but it is saying that we are aware of where your code is first. And then the next thing is that if your variable declaration is sitting in a function, right? Let's talk about something. We call it execution context. Alright. Let's say we have first. Alright. If we call our function first, it will you get our first. But what actually happens is that think of execution context as a box. Alright. And then let us say so if we call this first function, you see the second function is not working. Why? You only get console.log first. So what happened? Why don't we have a first, second function?
Because you don't call the second.
Right. So if we call the second function here, then we have what? First of all, this one will run first, right? Which calls this particular function, and then it will call the second one, right? So what happens is that when you call the first one, right, the JavaScript will put it, think of it this way, you will have the second sitting on top of the first, alright? Okay, so it will perform the second operator. First of all, it will call the first function, right? Okay, but the first function says that call the okay, good. The first function will call itself, right? Which will put the second, which calls what? The second function, right? Okay, let us write another function. So what it does is that the first function is first called, right, with regards to this particular code, right? Okay. Then it puts the first function, the second function on top of the first, then the third function is put on top of them, right? Okay. So after it has what it's supposed to do, let's say perform some particular code, right? After it has done this, right, then it will move this one off the execution context, right? And then it was supposed to call the third function, right? Then it takes this one off the execution context, and then it will run back to the first function, and then everything is done. Do you understand? Right.
But why do we see only the third in the function?
Because the third is, how do you call it, the final function that is being called by the second function. Because first of all, we call the first, which sits on top of the execution context, and then call the second, which sits on top of it, and then call the third, and it's supposed to run this way. But if you have to put the third
but the previous one you called the first and second both keep. Why didn't you need the second one?
That's in which one?
The previous one before you added the third function. When you called the first and second functions, it came first, second.
In this case, I'm performing a particular task here before I call the second. But the first function is not off the execution context yet. Like, it is still there because it is calling the second one after this console.log. Right, in this case, I don't want you to do anything else to confuse you, but what I want you to understand is that it creates an execution context that each function sits on top of the other. You get it? So variables, so as each one sits on top of the other, then it will create its own, how do you call it, variable it always does three things. It first create the variable object, set the scope, and then set the this object. So in this particular case, right, if it runs the first variable, right, it will set the scope here. If you run the first function, right, there's a reason why I'm talking about this. I'm impressed at. If it runs the first function, right, here it will create the variable object, set its scope, and then set the this object. Hold on to the this object for now. Now we know about scope and then the variable object, right? The variable object is where you have your function declaration and then your variable declarations. Remember, right? Good. After that, it calls this one, right? The second. After it calls the second one, it also creates its own variable. So the process repeats: variable declaration, and then sets the scope. So it always does three things, and then sets the this object. But I've not talked about the this. We'll talk about it later. Anyway, so it does this operation in every function what call. It will do it here, it will do it here, and it will do it what? Here. You get it? So in each case, it is setting the first creating the variable declaration, it's variable object, sorry. Right, it creates the variable. In each case, it does these three things all the time. Variable object, how do you call it? Set the scope, and then set the this. Variable object, set the scope, and then set the this. Right, so let's talk about it. In this case, the variable object, there's no variable declaration in this one. Right? So let us assume that we have our x here. X equals to 10. Alright? Okay. In this particular function, the variable object is declared first set to undefined and later set to 10, depending on whatever you are doing. Right? Good. Then it will set the scope of this first one. Right? The scope of this first one means that the inner function of this one is not accessible to what? The inner function of this particular one is now accessible to what? The second one, because of where it sits basically. Right? And then it will set the this variable. Ignore that. Then it will come the same thing here. It will set the scope. As it set the scope here, it is aware that it can have access to what? Its outer variable, which is what? Yes, and then variable in the first is what? X, which is 10. Right? And then it will also set the variable object and then set the scope in the third one. So as it set the scope in the third one, right, it knows that, okay, assuming that this is 20, as it sets the scope here, right, we know that it can have access to what? Thank you. But then in this particular order, as it sets the scope, it will be aware that, okay, in this particular function, right, since scope chain is upward, right, it cannot have access to what? Yes, it cannot have access to B because of where it's what? Thank you. So in each function call, what two things is that one? It set the variable object which scans through your code and then look for your, how do you call it, variable declaration and function declaration, and then to set your scope and to set your, how do you call it, the this object. We talk about it that time. I mentioned the this object, but I think you forgot. Right. And then to set your this object in this particular scope, it will make you aware that, okay, let's assume that you have another function here, variable j equals to 50. Right? Okay. In this particular variable object, right, it will set the scope here such that it will be aware that it can have access to what? Thank you. So at this point, it's aware the scope chain runs upward. So even the third function right, which is inside the body, can have access to what?
The first.
Thank you. But at this part of the code, right, we can't have access to, let's just say, W equals to 100, right? At this point, we can't have access to W even through what? The second, or even through the first, or even outside the first. But because of where it sits, you see, lexically in the scope chain, right? Because the scope chain runs what? Upwards, not what? Okay. So at this point, if you say console.log W, what do you think we'll get?
I want to see the value of it. 100.
Watch that thing here. Well. Wow. Error. Why?
Because
because of where it sits lexically in the scope chain. Because at this point, right, you can't have access to W because it is sitting where? Here. Chanin here. Way. This one comes first. This one is in the second. This one is inside where? Where third. Third. Right? Let us move the function and take it. Oh, come on. Yeah. And then let's move this one. Yeah. Let's just move this one. Yes, now. Where you can see the indentation small. Right. This one sits inside here, the first function. Right, and it sits at the bottom part. So the top function here, let's just say, let's not even call W here. Let's call W inside here. What will we get? Why?
Because they can't have access to the third function.
Why?
Because of the scope chain.
Thank you. So it's not aware of it, but we can have access to W in the third function. This is the third, right?
Yeah.
Do you understand? Yeah, sure. That's a scope change for you. But next time we'll talk about this problem. Any question? Ask a question. Thank you.
Okay, so you see where you put the console.log W outside the underneath there. Yeah. It will throw an error. But my tell said it reads upward there. So why doesn't it read the one before? Well, because it is outside the first
It's outside
function.
the first function. So it won't count. Because it is outside. But if it is inside, then we are talking about. So you look at where the keyword is where it sits lexically. Where it sits in terms of the function structure. So assuming say, wait, let us make it more confusing for you. So you have function. First, and then write console. First of all, let us call the first function. Say var equals to like this. So we have the first function, right? We have the second function, like this. Right. Okay. Let us call the first function first. First function, let us console. Can we have access to m?
Yes.
Even if we put it if we put it here.
Yes, we have access.
Right. What?
Because it's not sitting in another function. It's a different function.
What if I told you this one? Okay. So if I say cos
No, this one because you console.log inside the first function.
so what?
Because you console.log inside the first function, that's why.
Why? We have m here. M is here.
Yeah.
Why is it that when we console.log m here, it gives us an error?
Because it's not called the third function.
Huh?
It's not called the third function.
Well, I should call the third function here.
Yeah.
Now, each function creates its own unique execution context. So it is not exposed to this function's execution context is not exposed to this function's execution context. So there are two different things. This function execution context is only aware of only this one. You get it? We'll go by it another time. So don't worry. It's only aware of this one, but not aware of what? This one's execution context. Because it's sitting outside the scope of what? Unless we put this one here, which is not in what? Thank you. And we can have access to. Right? Okay. We can't have access to even if the same principle applies. So you have to watch where it sits in terms of the lexical context. Right? If we say console log y, what will we get?
Error.
Why?
Because because the scripting we support.
Thank you. But we can have access to what? Here. Y console log x, what do we get?
Wait.
Why?
Because you read the scope, because of the scripting.
Why is mine? It's not working. Oh, I've not called this again. Do you understand? Very sure. Very sure. Alright. Okay. So if I console dot, right? Let's say log y, what do I get?
get on.
Why?
Because it, because it's inside of another function.
Why? So why can't I have access to it?
Because of the lexical context.
Execution context.
Execution.
Right. Because every function creates its own what? Execution context, and this one doesn't have access to this function's execution context because it is because of the lexical chain. Even if I put it here. Alright. Still. So it reads what? What's and what? That's it. Any question? Any question? I'm not recording that. These are some of the little problems you face when you're dealing with JavaScript. Probably you don't understand why you have such problems. So, thank you. The speed we go, you will have to finish really, what do you call it, sharp. I was in my river 1 hour.